Next up, we're going to have the doyen of women's history, who we're delighted to have with us today, all the way from Warwick, Maria Luddy, who I worked with many, many decades ago on the famous Women's History Project, which produced so much good information about women's history in Ireland. And to introduce her and chair the session, we have Lisa Godson, who modestly wants to be described as a cultural historian, but she's not just that. She is one of the editors of a remarkable book on material culture called Making 1916, which has been used by all sorts of people. It was the first time somebody started looking at the material culture of 1916 in a sort of analytical and clever way. Still a book that I have recourse to very often. She's going through the Leaving Cert with her son at the moment, so she's mildly demented. There are other people in the same case, I think, in this room. It's that time of the year. And I will ask her to come and introduce Maria to you. Lisa.
So thanks, Katrina, and for organising today, which has been really brilliant so far. So really honoured to introduce Maria Luddy, who's the Professor Emeritus of Modern Irish History at the University of Warwick, and has published extensively on social, gender and women's history in 19th and 20th century Ireland. Katrina referred to the Women's History Project, which ran from 1997 and to 2002. I think I had some of the early CD-ROMs of sources for Irish women's history, which was so invaluable to so many historians. Which has been recently updated and is available on the Irish Manuscripts Commission website, which is brilliant. And then long list of published works, including the History and Documents, Women in Ireland, 1800 to 1918, which is now in its 7th printing. And she's currently completing a History and Documents on sex and intimacy in Ireland since 1800, and working on a history of sex and violence in Ireland, 1918 to 1949. So can you welcome Maria, please? Thanks.
Right. It's not a good start when your pages are upside down. Thank you, Lisa, very much for that introduction, and to Katrina and the Royal Irish Academy for organising this event, which I think is so important. And I'm just dying to see what comes out of it and this afternoon. It's a very significant conference. Unlike Kieran, I actually don't tell people what I'm working on because there's the end of the evening if I tell them I'm working on sex crimes in Ireland between 1918 and 1950. And there were a hell of a lot of them. And if you want to talk about trauma in the ordinary archives that we have, mother and baby homes, industrial schools and all that, I'll tell you, going through court records and then the prisoner files of these cases is also very, very traumatic. So I just want to, before I start, provide a quote from two historians who worked on archives, and it's I think maybe just something to keep in mind as we go through the day. And they note, this is Swartz and Cook, archives ever since ancient Greece have been about power, about maintaining power, about the power of the present to control what is and will be known about the past, about the power of remembering over forgetting. I think that's going to be particularly important when we come to this afternoon's sessions. And some of you may have seen my article in History Ireland recently, so really I'm just kind of going to expand on that, and a bit like Kieran, I'm kind of telling the story from somebody who uses archives, and I have been using archives for over 40 years, but I'm not going back that far because I think you might find it very, very tedious. So really I'm covering a period of maybe in the last 4 or 5 years about access to archives that I have actually wanted to use. One of the things I would say is that since we did the Women's History Project, where we saw stuff in basements, in attics, I remember a whole sheaf of very significant archives held in plastic bags under a water tank in a cupboard. Luckily enough, we got them moved to a proper archive. But like in the 1990s, there wasn't, I think, as much concern about where some records were actually kept. But luckily enough, I think one of the things that has really changed over the last 30-odd years is the fact that there are now proper local archives, and also that they have a lot of those records and they have saved an awful lot of those records. When we were looking at hospital records, we did see a lot of them in hospitals, in basements and whatever, and I will come back to that in a minute. Now, so that's one change that has occurred. The other change, again, Katrina mentioned it this morning, is the digitisation of documents, newspapers, maps and whatever. And also just the wonderful work Katrina herself has done, making the 1901 and 1911 census available. Just absolutely fabulous resources. And of course, again, we had mentioned earlier the Bureau of Military History papers and all of those materials, which makes Irish history of that period much, much more accessible to everyone, anybody in the world who's interested, because it's all there online, as it were. Now, I approve of digitisation. There are issues around it, but I also worry a little bit about it because I have, over the last few years, been told that if I want to see a particular archive which has been digitised, I have to look at the digitised version rather than the original. And there was one place an archive I wanted to go to, which I won't name, but it is in the west of Ireland. And I wanted to look at Home Assistance records that Niamh talked about. And I was told that the Home Assistance records had actually been digitised, and I could not see the originals. So I made an argument for seeing the originals because it's much, much easier to work from the original. But anyway, I was told no. That was fine. Then that was sorted. I was going to look at the digitised version. Then I was told I would only have access to the machine if no member of the public came in to the library during the day to actually access the machine, right? I wanted to use. So that, I said, oh, okay. Now I was trying to arrange a trip from England over to Ireland to do this research. I thought, that now could really kind of, mess it all up. So the next thing, I got over that. I said, okay, I'll go. Told the person involved, I'll be over such and such a time. Oh, sorry, no archivist here. They'll be on holidays. Right. So I've done nothing about it since, because that, I fear, was somebody who did not want me to actually look at those records. And that happened in the last 3 years. So not great, really. But one of the really good things about local authority archives, and I think Niamh mentioned it as well, is the number of those archival sites that have websites, and you can actually see what they have and look through that material. And some of those websites are absolutely amazing. And they also allow you access, for instance, to digitised workhouse records. So all the stuff is available out there. So I'm going to start then with a little basic question, which is, does anybody know, or I suppose how many people know, that there is a Garda archive? Okay, anybody ever been in it? 1, 2, excellent. 3, wow, I am so surprised. I spent 2 years trying to get in. I actually saw this archive being set up in the 1990s. I spent 2 years trying to get in. I had no success, was told there is no archivist. They're in the Dublin Castle, yeah. And I spoke to the person there, and no archivist, so no access. I really wanted to see just one document I wanted to see, and I had been told by a person who had seen this document years ago, they had been told that this document had been destroyed in a flood. And so the person I spoke to in the archive said, oh, we had a flood a few years ago and most of our documents, not all, but most of our documents have been destroyed or damaged or whatever. So I said, well, could I send in a researcher just look for this one document? And the person there read out from a catalogue, over the phone, read out a list of stuff they had. And it didn't get to the end of it because it would have been a very long phone call. So sent my researcher in. She was allowed to look at this one document, which does still survive, right? Wasn't allowed to photograph it, even though it's from the 1920s. Wasn't allowed to photograph it and had to type it all out there and then, which was fine. But the person who was overseeing her was very anxious that she was typing it all out. It was only 4 pages. right? And it's a really interesting document which says a lot about police attitudes to women and crime, particularly sexual crime in the 1920s. But just to say that there is an archive there, but it's impossible to get into. Why have an archive if you're not actually going to allow people to look at it? Okay, and I think this is something that is problematic and that we need to do something. If the guards are not going to support this archive, then let it be somewhere like the National Archives or somewhere else where people can access it. I think that's the fundamental about archives. Now, also we know it's been difficult to access Catholic records, convent records and all of that. And particularly Catholic diocesan archives. Many don't have archivists, so that really is the reason why they don't allow access. But one of the most underused Catholic diocesan archives is the Cloyne Diocesan Archives, which is held in the Bishop's House in Cove. And I actually did see those records in the late 1990s when Sister Cabrini Delahunty, RIP, was actually making a catalogue of them. And she had a wonderful catalogue, and I saw some of the papers, and they're just amazing. The archive is as good, if not better, than the Dublin Diocesan Archives. It is that rich. And I spent the last 10 years trying to get into it without any success at all. I get as far as the diocesan secretary, and that's it. No access. And when Mary O'Dowd and myself were writing our marriage book, that was one of the archives we wanted to get into because it is a perspective from rural Ireland. It's not the perspective from Dublin. And I think we miss our book would have been much, much richer if we could have accessed that material. And the other thing I think we need to be concerned about are convent archives. And I'm not talking about the institutional records because that's going to be discussed this afternoon. I'm just talking about convent, convents are closing at quite a scale. And what is happening to their records, right? Because this is the social, economic, it is also educational history of local communities in Ireland. Are those records being centralised? What's going to happen when the convents themselves, the communities no longer exist? There are all those kinds of questions I think that need to be asked about these records. And again, who has authority and who will get to see them? Or are they going to be sent out of the country to the other communities abroad where they still run or exist, or are they going to be sent to Rome? So I think those again we need to actually look at that question of convent archives. I was in Mitchelstown in April of this year up at the Catholic Church and looked across and saw they were knocking down the Presentation Convent. It's been sold for years and the land is going to be used for a new housing estate. And my only thought was, has somebody taken photographs of the inside of that building to have a record of the kind of architecture of it? I'm sure their archives have been saved because Presentation are very good at looking after their archives. And what about the material objects that were in that community? What has happened to those kinds of things? And that's what I was thinking about when I saw this building being knocked down. And then again, as we said, access to these archives, when we were revamping the Sources of Women's History database available on the Irish Manuscripts Commission website, if anybody wants to check it out, I wrote to the Good Shepherd's sisters and asked if they want to do anything updating on their records, which were in the database. And they wrote back saying they wanted it removed from the website, which we had to comply with. At the same time, I'd written to the Presentation again, were there any updates? They said they also wanted it removed. But I managed to persuade the Presentation sisters to leave the information on the database. But the Good Shepherd sisters' records are now no longer listed. And again, just complete closing down of that. And I remember saying to somebody recently that when I was researching in the 1980s on philanthropy, I spent a long time looking at Good Shepherd records, of their Magdalene Asylum records up to 1900. They'd asked me not to go beyond 1900, which was fine with me because there were no cameras, there were no no laptops at the time I was doing any of this, and I wrote all the stuff out by hand. Very happy I was to do it. And they were, it was extraordinary. They were delighted that somebody was interested in their history. And I must have been in the convents all around the country, the Good Shepherds. And 11 o'clock in the morning, they bring you a cup of coffee with biscuits, have a chat. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they do the same. And that's gone completely. You can't get access at all to any of these records, as we know now. So again, these things are interesting, but they're particularly interesting, I think, in terms of what is not available. And I think also there is such an emotion, a reaction from the various religious communities, which is actually emotionally based. There's lots of other things like finance and all those other complications too, but I think some of it is just about emotion and their inability to deal with their own history. But anyway, now the other thing I did, one of the things I started to do about 3 years ago, not really recommend this to anybody. I started with the guards actually, sending in an FOI, Freedom of Information request, to discover that the Guards are an exempt organisation. So I wasn't going to find out anything about the Garda archives from an FOI request. So I thought I'd try some other records. So TUSLA, I was interested in what the records TUSLA had about mother and baby homes. And I sent in an FOI to them. Now, I've used the FOI a lot in the last 2 years. I wouldn't recommend it as a way of getting information. I'm absolutely convinced. Some of them will answer you and give you proper, full answers. But I am absolutely convinced that most of them, FOI officers, when they get a request, the first thing they do is try and think of how not to answer it. Right? So, and I've had that, other people have told me of that experience as well. So I went to TUSLA, said, could you tell me what record you have relating to mother and baby institutions? And they sent me a list, actually, of the records they had, which comes to about 100 organisations and adoption agencies. They also have, as we saw from Neve's talk, boarding out of children. They have also home assistance, board of health records, and records of adoption agencies. And within these records are these local authority reports of publicly funded institutions, such as county homes, and records relating to boarding out. All the records held by TUSLA are closed to researchers. The majority, some, not all, but a lot of them have been digitised. So I asked TUSLA, do they return the originals once they have digitised the material? And they said no, they hold on to both, which I don't understand. And I just wonder, how is that justified? What is the legal basis by which publicly funded local authority records were acquired by TUSLA and then closed to research? Because as Neve showed us, if you go to Donegal, you can see, under certain conditions, you can see these home assistance records and whatever. So in other words, the local authorities handed over the records to TUSLA, and they now have a major gap in their own archives, and the integrity of that archive is compromised. So a whole tranche of records have been removed from publicly funded bodies and have been really removed also from the historical record. And how does any historian of welfare in 20th century Ireland write a history of that welfare system without access to these records? And I myself have looked at a number of home assistance, Board of Health records for various counties around the country, and they are an extraordinary record of how hospitals were run and managed. I mean, you'll get a lot about, somebody trying to fix the boiler in the local hospital, but you will also find what would have been under the workhouse system, outdoor relief. So people on home assistance who are being paid money to get by every week, and their records of, who's been given money, who gives out the money, all of this. The other thing you find in the home assistance, Board of Health records, lots of information about unmarried mothers, because, of course, the local authorities funded a lot of unmarried mothers stay in county homes and also in mother and baby homes. And they provide that information. They tell you how much they paid and whatever. They give the names of the individuals. There was one Board of Health record I saw had a wonderful account of their solicitors, because this particular Board of Health did not want to be paying all this money out for the support of these women, unmarried mothers, in these mother and baby homes, the one they were going to. So they sent a couple of solicitors into either the county home or the mother and baby home, asking the woman involved who was the putative father, all the circumstances, and the function of the solicitors was to decide whether the local authority could go after that putative father for the maintenance of that child. And these Board of Assistance records have that information as well. Now, you can use them, of course, but you don't use people's names because people are identified. But it's, again, a different angle on who was funding these, mother and baby homes and what was expected of the women. And the other thing you can do, well, actually you can't do it, but in 1930, the government brought in a bill with the title of Affiliation Orders Bill, a very simple title for an Irish Act. 1930, Affiliation Orders Ireland Act. And under this Act, it was the first time in Irish history that a woman, an unmarried mother, could sue a putative father for the maintenance of her child. English women could do it before this. They could do it from the 1830s, but Irish women couldn't. Because Irish women, it was believed, were not to be trusted to give you the right name of the father, right, or that they could accuse somebody who wasn't the father. And so Irish women weren't to be trusted. By 1930, it was thought maybe you could trust them, right? So you have all of these affiliation cases that come up, and these women do take cases to court. There are hundreds of them between the 1930s and the 1970s. You cannot see the records, right, because they are part of the family court system. If you want to see records in the family court, you have to go before a circuit court judge with an affidavit to argue your case for the exact record you want to see. Now, who's going to do that? What judge will also entertain that, given the kind of a claim there is on court time? And yet, in the newspapers, you will find all of these recorded. The name of the father, putative father, the name of the mother, they give you their addresses, and they give you the amount, even though the cases were held in camera, the newspaper report will tell you the names, and they'll tell you the amount of money that was awarded to the mother. Okay, now I have a question. I always ask this to archivists when I meet them. Under GDPR, right, data protection, those records, their court records, can't see them, that's fine. They're in the newspapers. So can I name in something I write somebody who has already been named publicly in the newspapers? And I have been given so many different answers by different archivists as to what is the right thing to do. I don't know what the right thing to do is, because all the answers I've been given are completely different. I was told that it didn't matter about murder cases. You can name them, right? It doesn't matter. And I've seen, there are books written about murder in Ireland in the 19th and into the 20th century, where the various perpetrators, victims, family members and whatever have been named. So I presume you can name them. I don't know, but nothing has ever come out of, data protection relating to those books. And that's, it's an interesting question. So what if something is actually published in the newspaper as a crime and somebody has been convicted of a crime, right? And you can come across it in a court record as well. Can you actually name the individuals? Right. One person told me, and I won't go into this in too much detail. One person told me, yes, you can name them because it's in the public domain already. Another person told me, by naming them, you're bringing the public's attention to the newspaper article in which those individuals are named. Therefore, you're breaking the law. Right? I have no idea. And I have asked legal people about this, and I'm getting various answers as well. But leaving that aside, now, where are we, Lisa? Because I know I'm wandering. Oh, I have 8 minutes. Oh, well, no, lunch is over. Okay. Okay, now, then the other thing I did, again, FOIs, Health Service Executive, right? Our friends. I just think they're in a complete mess. So I was very interested in lunacy asylum records, and I'll tell you why. When I grew up in Clonmel, we lived behind what we call the mental hospital, St. Luke's, right? And the only time we ever took any notice of St. Luke's was when a patient escaped and you were told to stay in, right? And it did happen quite often. I think most of them were so harmless, they wouldn't have done anything to anyone. But I was interested, and being from Clonmel, I'm interested in the records. So I got in touch with the HSE. I just wrote and asked them, where are the records? No answer. Wrote about some other hospitals, no answer. Then I got in touch with them under FOI, right? And I did start to get answers. And the answers were just absolutely abysmal. And many of them, they gave me the wrong information. Lots of the HSEs under whose authority these records are held and they're under their care, right? Did not know where the records were, did not know what conditions they were held in, and many told me that they actually didn't have the records, so they couldn't answer my questions, right? And I thought, this is like, I'll just give you one, if I can just find the example I had, of an answer I got, right? So they had little or no idea that they had mental health records in their care. Many of them were unaware of where these records were kept. Almost all informed me that such records were closed to all researchers, or as one person wrote to me and said, I had no right to see them. And anyway, she was in charge and she would decide who would see them. So I didn't know if I should have bribed her or just kind of, maybe push that a little bit. Yeah, no, it was a she. It was a she, yeah. Oh, sorry, yeah. Oh, I'm nearly finished then. Completely misinformed me about the extent and range of the material and whatever. But I've been going on about this for ages. And so I was looking for the Clonmel records. I knew where the minute books were, but I also knew that there were case records for St. Luke's, which dated from 1897 up to 1937. And could I find? No one knew where they were. HSE hadn't a clue. It was really, really bad. The HSE was just absolutely abysmal in the way that they dealt with me over various hospital records. And 2 weeks ago, I found out quite by accident that the case books are held in the Clonmel County Council archives. They don't have an archivist at the present. Right? They did tell me that they hope to appoint one within the near future, whatever that means. But also, you cannot see the records, even if there was an archivist there, you cannot see them because they have only been deposited there. They're there just for storage. They're not there to be seen by anybody. And so I got in touch again with the HSE, which has dealings with the Grange Gorman, and I wanted to find out if they had a national policy. And when I wrote to them originally in 2022, end of 22, 2023, they said at that stage they were trying to devise a policy, and the policy would include something like there would be 100 years closure, and then the records would be available to people, researchers, bona fide researchers. None of the HSE offices I contacted around the country knew anything about this. So I got in touch with them again about at the end of April of this year. I said, any policy devised yet? And yes, there is a policy, but it's only in draft. And they're hoping, because the HSE apparently is undergoing some kind of a governance restructure at the moment, they're hoping that restructure will be finished by September. And then they will try and get this policy formalised. And then after that, it will go out to the various local HSEs who don't actually realise they have these records in their care anyway. So is that policy going to be ready? I don't know. Might be September, might be next September, might be whenever. Now that the Data Protection Commission is involved in those cases that, you know, were mentioned on TikTok, I don't know what TikTok is, but there you go, that they're going to do a survey. Data Protection Commission is going to do a survey of the conditions under which the health service executive hold their hospital records. They said they're going to do every hospital. And all I can think of, we'll never get to see a record again, because that's going to stop access, I think. So the person in the HSE I was dealing with last time, it's actually very helpful. She said, you could get in touch with the National Archives. They have a list of all the lunatic asylum records, and you could ask them about them. So I wrote to the National Archives, again, about 3 weeks ago, and I got the response was, they have the list of 3 hospitals, right, and they named the 3 hospitals. The lists are in the archive. You have to get permission from the HSE to see the list. And I just thought, this is definitely catch-22. This is absolutely, it's ludicrous beyond, you know, whatever that word would be if it was a long word. And I literally did actually laugh and thought, if you are, I know how I can do it. I know how I can get into these archives because I've been doing it for 40-odd years. But I also know that somebody starting out now and trying to access any of these records, or some local historian, they haven't a hope in hell of getting access to these records. And I will just finish up in saying that why have we got records held by organisations in which they have no interest, they have no historical understanding, right? They have no intention, as far as I can see, of actually letting anybody see them, because it doesn't matter to them. They're administrators, you know, they're doing other work that they deem is much, much more important, right? So the historical stuff is like, basically don't bother me with it, right? And I think something has to be done about those records. And there are lots of other records, not just the HSE. I do think the HSE is probably one of the worst in terms of how they deal with the public, in terms of information and getting information from them. But when that article appeared in History Ireland, I had people contact me. And one of the things that kept coming up, and records I've never used myself, the Land Commission records, yeah? Well, and it was somebody called it the Land Commission problem, yeah? And these are people who are obviously extraordinarily frustrated in their dealings with the Land Commission and what they're doing in terms of access. And I know from an article in the Irish Times in January 2022, long article on the Land Commission records, they're digitising their search aids, right? Don't know where that's got to, because that's what they said they were going to do. But when the Irish Times, like, they have millions of records, so it's never going to be digitised because it would just cost too much money. But they're digitising the search aids. And the guy who was showing the journalist round said, we have no vested interest in keeping any of this hidden. We want to work towards it being available to researchers, right? And I think I'm just really, really cynical, but there's not a word of truth in either of those sentences. So, and I do think this is the kind of resource we might think, right, we've really, industrial schools are shocking. Magdalene Asylum is shocking. Mother and baby home is shocking. There will be other things that will be shocking to us. But I also think there are issues of power around the Land Commission records that no one in government, I think in particular, has any, and particularly the political parties, they all have a vested interest in keeping those secret or hidden, unfindable for as long as possible. And I do think that that's a serious issue. The other, as if I could solve any problems, the other issue that came up was the National Archives and their opening hours. And what are they doing closing at lunchtime and sending us out? And it's like Kieran says, they come around at 4:30, 4:45, and, it doesn't open till 10 anyway. And they have a lot of archivists there, as far as I can tell, a lot of people who work there. They shouldn't have. This is a national institution. There shouldn't be a closed lunch hour. And if you're coming like me, as many people do, coming from England, other parts of Ireland, and you want to be in Dublin, God, it's expensive enough trying to stay in a hotel, right, or anywhere in Dublin. But then you go to your archive, you're just starting when they're putting you out again at lunchtime, and then you have to come back in the afternoon for because it is only a couple of hours. Yeah, and also that, well, anyway, I don't know what I can do about that, but I do think it is something that the National Archives should really take note of and be aware of. People's time is also valuable, and they're there to serve the public. And that is exactly what they should be doing. And I better leave it there. Okay.